In 2016, a new era began for the Dallas Cowboys with the emergence of Ezekiel Elliott and Dak Prescott. However, spending on the part of the front office has set up significant financial obstacles over the next year as the salary cap looms large in Dallas and the need to pay Amari Cooper, Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, as well as numerous defensive assets grows closer. In this Fantasy Football Films episode, we are going to be breaking down game film from the Cowboys' 2018 season and discussing the implications for fantasy football. I'll touch on Dak Prescott's passing checklist, Ezekiel Elliott's key role within the offense, as well as the roles of Cooper and Gallup. Starting with the receivers is Amari Cooper. He is entering his 5th year of his NFL career, and this will be his first full year as a Cowboy. He was traded last year for a first-round pick from the Oakland Raiders and meshed almost instantly in the Cowboys' offense. He pretty much profiles as a physical receiver who can win in 1v1 matchups and has a first-round NFL draft pick pedigree. I displayed his 2018 stats with the Cowboys, which totaled 11 games if you include the playoffs. The important thing here is that for fantasy football, if you projected him out using this stat line for the 2018 season, he would have finished with 96 receptions, 1,300 yards, and 11.6 touchdowns, which is good enough to make him the 8th overall wide receiver, just ahead of Juju Smith-Schuster. A lot of people were surprised by the fact that Cooper came in and produced right away in the Cowboys system. I'm not really one of them after watching the tape. Cooper is utilized as a 1v1 matchup weapon, and the routes that he would run didn't rely on timing and chemistry, which usually take a while to develop with quarterbacks, but rather physically beating a defender and Dak delivering an accurate ball, which is something Prescott is very capable of doing on a consistent basis. What we saw last year with Cooper is what I would expect from him this year with the Cowboys, so long as Zeke is on the field. I graded him as an early to mid 3rd rounder in fantasy drafts. I think he is a pretty sure bet as a wide receiver 1, and I'm a pretty good value now if you're drafting him with the mindset that Zeke will be there week 1, which I do not expect. Michael Gallup is the receiver opposite of Cooper, who will be entering his sophomore season. They're pretty similar physically and pretty much run the same routes. Dak essentially chooses which one he wants to use on a given play and plays matchup ball. Considering he got off to a slow start in his rookie season, like all rookie receivers do, he would have projected to 92 total targets, which isn't horrible in terms of fantasy. The issue is that there just isn't enough touchdowns to go around in this offense. It's Cooper, Zeke, and then 2 or 3 touchdowns are sprinkled in with the other receivers, which isn't going to cut it. He's a late round flyer at best, in my opinion. And throwing the ball, of course, is Dak Prescott. I like Dak, to be honest. There are things he does well and there are things he doesn't do or does very poorly for a starting NFL quarterback. For fantasy, he's one of the most consistent quarterbacks on a yearly basis, finishing pretty much mid to low end QB1 every single season. And I predict that he will do the same this year, so long as Zeke is on the field. Which finally brings me to the star of the Cowboys offense, Ezekiel Elliott. The 4th-year running back operated as a clear workhorse in the Cowboys offense, totaling 433 touches and a whopping 2,236 all-purpose yards and 11 touchdowns. Yeah, he's a complete safe bet to return top-tier numbers this year, and I would take him as the number 1 overall player in all formats, should he be under contract, which I do not expect to happen, unfortunately. He truly is an elite talent, and to explain this, I brought along some elusiveness stats. Let me start by saying that stats like this have to be taken with a grain of salt. I feel fantasy analysts rely so heavily on him that it clouds what is really going on behind the scenes, which is the whole reason I started this YouTube channel, to not just follow the stats, but look at the game tape and tell us where to actually value fantasy players. There's an old saying, there's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics. Relying on them to make judgments in football, I think, is a flawed concept, but they can help prove your point, which makes them useful. Anyways, Amongst running backs that totaled at least 200 touches, Zeke ranked 8th among them for yards per touch. And here's a short list of the running backs that were ahead of him. And you can see it is littered with the top backs in the NFL, offenses that have elite passing games, along with some few outliers. Hello, Lamar Miller. Now, considering the way defenses play Elliott, you would expect the amount of volume given to running backs to inversely affect yards per attempt. What I mean by that is more touches a running back receives, the more defenses will plan to stop them, thus more defenders will be committed to stopping a running back on a given play, and thus artificially lowers yards per attempt and lowering elusiveness rating. What I read from this and what I want you to take away is Zeke is clearly one of the most elite talents at the running back position in the NFL, despite defenses selling out to stop him. Because Alfred Morris has recently signed as an insurance policy should Zeke not play, I included some stats from him in San Francisco last year. It's difficult to really project him within a different offense. It's reasonable to assume he will produce at a higher level in Dallas, since he did when he played in Dallas just a few years ago. The only takeaway is that he isn't Zeke, and that matters within this offense. One stat that shows this a little is total broken tackles, which for Morris was essentially every 10 plays. For Zeke, he broke over 50, and with 400 touches is essentially every 8 times he touches the ball, which may not seem like a lot, but it is significantly more when receiving that much volume within this offense. Since the 2016 season, the pairing of Elliott and Prescott has been one of the best stories within the NFL. During their rookie season, they were able to vault the Cowboys into the playoffs, losing only because they ran into Aaron Rodgers. However, it's pretty clear that they need each other for this offense to work. Dallas really only has 2 offensive punches, but they are 2 potent offensive weapons. Each of them relies on the other to keep defenses off balance. This really is only because of Prescott and the way he plays quarterback. Because Elliott's elite talent prevents defenses from really scheming against Prescott and forcing him to make bad decisions, which he often does when coverages force him into locating bad matchups. The first 2 plays I chose were from the Cowboys' Week 14 matchup against the Eagles. It's early in the second half and Dallas is leading 6-0. It's 2nd and 5 and the Eagles are in a cover 1 man defense with the strong side linebacker playing a spy on Prescott in case he decides to scramble. While it's not an obvious passing situation per se, Rod Smith is in the backfield for Zeke, so the Eagles don't necessarily have to respect him as a dynamic playmaker like Elliott. At this point, it is not apparent that the Eagles are not in a zone defense because just a few plays earlier, in a similar situation, they showed the same personnel grouping and dropped back into a zone defense after the snap. However, if they were in a cover 3, the Eagles defenders would essentially have the same assignments. The play call for the Cowboys is a flat and slant combination to either side of the field. The flat slant concept is designed to be able to beat both zone and man coverages within the routes. It just depends which route is going to gain enough spacing to deliver a quick pass towards. To choose which side of the field to exploit, the quarterback progresses pre-snap to the side of the field he believes has the best chance of the slant being open, as it provides the most potential for a big play. In this case, it is the concept to the lower part of the screen with Cooper running the slant. This is because the cornerback who's over top of him is playing off coverage, giving him plenty of space to accelerate into his cut and gain separation. Instead, Prescott focuses on the right side of the field where the quarterback is playing inside leverage on Gallup. This inside leverage is used to prevent Gallup from cutting inside and making this route very difficult to complete. Not to mention the possibility of another linebacker stepping back into the route, causing him to be double covered. The reason I think Dak goes here is because it is the easiest side of the field to read with a clear check down option in the flat. The linebacker that is over Rod Smith is almost guaranteed to be playing man-to-man defense. If they were in zone, it will be his responsibility to step into the flat anyway. This matchup ensures Prescott that he will get the matchup he wants if he decides to check to the flat. My issue with this is that the Eagles are giving you a clear advantage with Cooper on the opposite side. From this position, the only way the defense can stop Cooper from getting wide open is for the defender that is shadowing the slot receiver to drop into coverage and thus leaving the flat wide open. After the snap of the ball, it is evident that the Eagles are indeed in man coverage. Prescott eyes the same side of the field he ID'd pre-snap, and interestingly enough, Gallup was able to cross the defender and create separation. Again, I will point out Cooper on the opposite side of the field. If Dak was able to identify the off coverage, he would have now seen Cooper having nearly 6 yards of separation between him and the cornerback. Not only is this a higher percentage completion, but Cooper has all the space in the world to turn upfield and really only a safety in position to stop him from scoring. However, Dak notices Gallup cutting in across the defender and decides to force the ball into tight coverage. This picture doesn't show the linebacker who is shadowing Rod Smith very well, but he has his hips pointed in the opposite direction of the route, so he's not in a position to affect the pass. Dak delivers a pass behind the defender and luckily is able to complete it for the first down to Gallup. I know that the outcome of this play turned out just fine, but Prescott not looking towards Cooper forced him into having to deliver to tight coverage to complete a pass to one of the slant routes. Not only this, but it limited the big play potential because the defender was so close to Gallup. This wouldn't have been the case if Prescott was able to identify the opposite side of the field. Based on the film that I have watched with Dak, I believe Prescott saw which matchup he wanted to exploit and was determined to throw it there. If he decided not to throw the slant, he knew for sure he could hit the flat with Rod Smith. I have another play where Dak is just clearly not viewing the whole field. His thought process is to identify a 1v1 matchup and trust his receiver to make a play. I don't necessarily have an issue with this process, except it's a low percentage option on a play-by-play basis, and that is amplified when you rely on it on almost every pass play. It's a very collegiate way to play quarterback. In college, identifying the best matchup is an effective way to attack defenses, as the gap in talent is often pretty big on the field. So you can scheme from week to week, matching your guys against another team and find which matchup is most favorable on the play. The problem with doing this in the NFL is, number one, the difference in ability really isn't that great, and post-snap coverages often change, forcing you to read the defense anyway. While I didn't view Linehan as a great offensive coordinator, I think that the play calls overall set Prescott up for success on most plays by calling plays that don't necessarily rely on his ability to read defenses, because often the defenders would play their assignments the same way in man and zone coverages. To me, this is a clear weakness within the passing game that defenses aren't able to exploit necessarily, because they always have to account for Elliott when he's on the field. Which leads me to the next play. It's midway through the third quarter and Dallas is 2nd and 15 with a 9-point lead. The Eagles are in what is basically a cover 3 with an additional defender to collapse underneath Cooper to take away a comeback route. The Eagles likely called this defense expecting Dallas to pass on this play. If Dak reads this as cover 3 and reads the matchup, one of his top options would be to throw a curl route to Cooper, who would essentially be in man coverage on his side of the field. The middle defender is positioned in order to step in front of the pass and intercept the ball. This is trying to bait Prescott into forcing the ball to Cooper and giving the defender a chance to create a turnover. However, the Cowboys call a pass designed to attack zone coverage. To his right is a sail concept designed for primarily cover 2, and since it's more likely the Eagles are going to drop back into cover 3 or cover 4, the two routes he really has to consider is the deep dig by Gallup and Elliott sneaking into the flat underneath. If you watched my first episode, I talked about a play where Marvin Jones ran a similar route with an underneath route used to get defenders in the middle of the field to collapse down and open up their zone. This is the same idea, expecting defenders to step forward and open the area for Gallup to be open downfield. The reason I selected this play is because Dak recognizes the coverage and progresses to the correct read, proving that he does have the ability to diagnose coverage. I just think he isn't consistent with being able to do so. Prescott IDs the defender stepping up to cover Zeke, opening up the zone behind him. Dak just has to eye down the nearest safety, pretending that he's going to throw deep down the sideline to Gallup so that the defender continues to drop. Prescott makes the appropriate read, but unfortunately completely overthrows Gallup and is intercepted. I know I've been beating up on Dak, but what I wanted to point out is he does have the tools to be a successful quarterback at the NFL level. I just don't think he is consistent enough as of yet to be reliable in a spread type offense. He relies heavily on matchups and the commanding running game to prevent defenses from throwing too many separate coverages at him where he struggles to identify appropriate route concepts. I also noticed that he can go through spurts where he struggles with accuracy, but that's not a consistent theme for me to label him as an inaccurate quarterback. For me, it's much more about mental errors than mechanics. The final play I chose to feature on this episode is from the matchup with the Colts the following week. Again, it's early in the third quarter, 2nd and 4, and the Cowboys are down 17-0. Prescott motions the slot receiver to the right side of the formation, and since the defender follows him across, he can be pretty sure the Colts are in some form of man coverage. Prescott motions the slot receiver to the left side of the formation, and since the defender follows him across, he can be pretty sure the Colts are in some form of man coverage. I will point out that before the snap, the cornerback shadowing Gallup drops back into off coverage, which Dak once again fails to recognize. The Colts are in a basic cover one man with two linebackers playing either side of Elliott in position to stop the run or defend him in either direction. The Cowboys are running two curl routes on the near side of the field, with Elliott running what is probably an option route underneath and Cooper running a seam at the top. What I'm observing on this play is the separate ways the cornerbacks are playing their man. Cooper is receiving press coverage while Gallup has the off coverage defender. It's pretty clear that Gallup has the favored route because once he curls back, he will have greater separation from his defender. As you may expect based on what I've already said regarding Prescott, he eyes down Cooper's route and chucks it to him deep, expecting him to make a play on the ball. For me, this play just reiterates what I've already mentioned about Dak's passing checklist. As soon as he identifies the 1v1 matchup he likes, he delivers the ball regardless of the separate routes being run. I will say that it's very likely the outside receivers are running option routes where, depending on if they get press or off coverage, they would alter their route. They would run a seam if being pressed and a curl if they are not. The significance of this is to point out that Dak would have to rely on Gallup to run a precise curl route, which he may not fully trust with his rookie receiver. Therefore, delivering to the seam route may be considered the higher percentage route option in his mind. Before I get to the offensive prototype, I wanted to state again that Ezekiel Elliott is the key to the success of the offense. Rather than just give bullet points, I wanted to explain this using a baseball analogy. I know this may be a simple concept, but stick with me on this. In baseball, most if not all hitters have specific areas of the field they are likely to hit that opposing teams strategize against, such as this area on the left side of the diamond. Similar to NFL receivers who are only elite against certain coverages and run certain routes much better than others, very few, if any, receivers have a full route tree that they can utilize on a given play. Defensive coordinators know this and adjust their defense to take away the strengths of an opposing receiver. In no situation can a defense fully prevent a receiver from making a play on them. They can only position themselves for the best odds. If you think of the batter as Amari Cooper, the defense adjusts the infield to take away his strength and most likely attack. In no scenario can the defense stop Amari from driving a line drive or smacking a ground ball to the right side, just like he can probably tear the top off a defense on a given play. But the chance of that happening isn't nearly as likely as him trying to use his strengths to beat you. Now place a man on first. Consider this runner as Elliott. Now the defense can adjust their coverage to take away Cooper's strength. They must adjust, otherwise they leave Elliott free to take a lead off of first or steal second. In football, they could sell out against the receivers, but this would leave them vulnerable to getting chewed up by the running game. This is only possible because of how dominant and dynamic Elliott is. He truly is a special talent that forces the defense to respect him, and if he decides to sit out this year regarding contract negotiations, that is going to be an incredibly damaging hit on the Dallas offense because his production isn't easily replaced. So for the fantasy offense prototype, I decided to bring out another baseball analogy. And for baseball fans out there, the best way to explain the Dallas offense is like a two-pitch pitcher throwing a fastball and a curve, of which Dallas's are pretty good, but neither can work without the other. As for the passing, on a typical pass play, Dak is going to identify his best pre-snap matchup and zero in on the route. If there isn't a feasible check down, he's going to do one of three things: scramble, throw the pass away, or take the sack. Rarely will he progress through his reads, which is another habit I think defenses can exploit. If I was designing a defense against him, I'd play a lot of cover 1 in obvious run situations and a lot of mixed cover 3 defenses in obvious pass situations. This puts Gallup and Cooper in man-to-man situations the entire game while setting traps for Prescott to throw into double or tight coverage. It's difficult to scheme this on a play-by-play basis simply because you always have to account for Elliott. Another strategy would be to set coverage against the checkdowns, forcing him to throw it downfield into tight coverage. I would employ a mix of them, all trusting he will not consistently read the coverage. In addition, I would do something similar to what the Eagles did, where I would give similar looks in the same situation, such as second and short and alter coverages, just so it would make it harder for Prescott to select the correct matchup read. In addition, I would call a lot of line stunts to force him to one side of the field that I wanted him to read to increase the chance of him throwing into trap coverage. The Dallas line is good in pass protection, so the stunt is more to overload one side of the line and push them back and force him away from a weaker coverage. The true key in beating the Cowboys is shortening their time of possession on offense, forcing them into passing situations, and taking advantage of down and distance. So for fantasy football, Zeke is a locked and loaded RB1, and if he signs, my number 1 pick. He's just too safe to avoid in the first round, and I shade on the side of safety in the early rounds in fantasy drafts. This is because I believe the fantasy leagues are won in the season with waiver wire pickups and late round picks. Again, I'm a value-based drafter, and if you pick in the first round, you aren't picking to return value, you're picking to maintain value. If you nail 3 of your first 4 picks for safety, it doesn't matter if they end up as the top fantasy assets. You just have to make sure that they're reliable and you're blocking off part of your fantasy roster on a week-to-week basis. And nobody embodies that this season like Elliott. Cooper is an interesting case. If I'm going strictly off value, then he is a steal in the 4th round if he falls there. I'm pretty happy to take him in the 3rd round, as there is pretty good chance that he will finish as a wide receiver 1 at the end of this year. The key is designing your roster around his inconsistency. Pairing him with Keenan Allen or Julian Edelman is perfect. You're basically taking advantage of his big weeks and hedging when he underperforms statistically. My advice is if you have 2 solid running backs, he would be okay as a wide receiver 1. But make sure you get a solid wide receiver 2 who is designed as a possession or experienced timing receiver, i.e. Julian Edelman. This is because successful quarterbacks heavily utilize these type of receivers because defenses often force them into these type of throws that have low big play potential and are more difficult to complete. They are reliable weapons of an offense. The issue is that typically these are short yardage routes and aren't typically red zone targets. I just mentioned Edelman and Allen as they fit this profile and have a reasonable threat in the end zone to deliver the upside of touchdowns on a week-by-week basis. With Gallup, he really is just a best ball target next year. He isn't going to be consistent enough to be reliable for season-long leagues. 1 week he can give you 80 yards, 5 receptions, and a touchdown. The next week, goose egg you or get measly 2 receptions for 15 yards. This isn't an offense that's going to be projectable on a matchup basis simply because you're playing the chance game when you just throwing 1v1 matchup ball all game. As for Dak, I think he will finish as a QB1 like he does every season. There will just be QB1s with higher upside that finish better than him at the season's end. For that reason, I think he's guaranteed to return value where he's going. The key is making sure Zeke is on the field. I wouldn't roll him out in my lineup without Zeke. I also would stream a QB when Dak is facing good man defenses. Don't worry about pass rush as much during the season as his decision making is quick, just not able to read the coverage. It matters more if the defense can confuse him or take away primary receiving options without a pass rush. And like I mentioned earlier many times, but I'll say it again since it's a big point of this episode, do not draft Cowboys if Zeke doesn't sign. The Cowboys need Zeke. Now, I'm of the mindset of Howie Roseman. Howie is the general manager of the Eagles, who is very much a value-based general manager. That means he will spend money at positions that you need to spend money as a franchise, and one of those positions is not the running back position. I believe, just like he does, running back is based 90% off of scheme and offensive line talent. In the case for the Cowboys, the elite talent of Zeke forces defenses to open receiving options downfield. And that fact is burning them now that Zeke is planning to sit out until he gets his contract renewed, which is pretty smart by his agent who is likely advising him, but I digress. If Zeke doesn't play, it's open season on Dak and his receivers. And I'm sorry, Dak just isn't gifted enough to overcome the coverage schemes that are going to be coming for him. If Zeke isn't there, I'd drop my rating for Cooper down to a wide receiver 3 flex option. Also, Tony Pollard is one of the Cowboys' late draft picks this year, but I think he will only be used as a receiving change of pace back should Zeke not be present. Now, Alfred Morris was just re-signed, which is a sign of trouble in Dallas. I rate him as an RB3 if he's the starter for Dallas. He just is not as effective as Zeke, but his utilization is enough to give him fantasy value. If I was drafting today, I would probably split the difference on Cooper and take him in the 5th. I'd like too many other players to consider him a 4th round pick without the guarantee Zeke will be there. And that concludes this episode. Thanks for watching. If you liked our content, please hit the subscribe button for our channel so you can receive our videos. I'm trying to release frequent fantasy film videos to help everybody out with their fantasy football leagues. If you have any questions, I'm on Twitter at RobFFFilms. And thanks for watching.